So we're ready to move on with what you have been learning with DevOps and get started with GitHub Actions. So welcome back to this video from Reese Teaches Programming, and you are at least waist deep now in a DevOps course. So if you are just now finding this video, you might want to back up 12 lessons or so, but we are just getting started with setting up our GitHub repo. So if you are already familiar with DevOps and these concepts and you're like, I am ready to dive in, I do not need to go back through 12 videos of, what is a test. Great, awesome, glad to have you. We are here on our GitHub page because we are going to get started setting up a repo and a test project so that we can get into GitHub Actions and understand what this is all about. So GitHub Actions, if you're not familiar, is a really powerful continuous integration and continuous deployment automation tool that's built right into GitHub. So it lets us define our custom workflows that are triggered by events in our repository, like pushing code or opening a pull request or publishing a release. And it is a way to automate those repetitive tasks in our development process. So we are going to get started here on our GitHub page. So if you are not logged into your GitHub and you're wanting to follow along, pause for a second, go get logged into GitHub. We're going to create a new repository. Now I'm going to be doing this first demo in .NET. I am going to do a second demo in another language. So if you're not a .NET person and none of this makes sense, maybe you don't have Visual Studio on your computer, that's fine. I'm going to do another demo with, a different language so you can just kind of see the differences. But I am going to get started by creating a new repository. And since this was going to be my .NET one, I'm going to call this .NET Demo Pipeline. We don't need a description unless you would just like one. I'm going to leave this public. We don't need a README template or anything like that. I'm just going to hit Create Repository. So that drops us into this screen that maybe you're familiar with where we are all ready to start working with this. And so the next step is to set up our .NET test project that we're going to be using. So that's going to take me over to Visual Studio where I'm going to set up a new just like basic console application using not .NET Framework, because I don't know if you've realized Framework is dead, but a .NET Core application for the purposes of testing. Now I'm also going to name this .NET Demo Pipeline just for the sake of consistency, and go ahead and let Visual Studio create that for me. And here we are in our program.cs with our lovely starter template hello world code. And then our next step, once you have your project ready, you can do anything you want with this. I'll probably just leave it, pretty much templated as is. But we need to initialize Git and connect to our GitHub repo so that this repository is set up with our test project. Now, if you don't work in Visual Studio often, or you are maybe new, maybe you've not really used source control in your Visual Studio before, you do want to ensure that Git is configured in Visual Studio. And if you don't have Git downloaded and installed, you'll want to go do that because you're going to have that on your computer in order for that to work. But if you would like to double check, you can come up to the Tools menu, click on Options, and then click on Source Control down here. There we go. And make sure your current source plugin is Git. And so if it's anything else, you'll need to change that, make sure you have the requisites installed. And that way, you're not going to run into any problems trying to get connected to GitHub. So in order to connect this to GitHub, we're going to need the remote URL of this repo that we created earlier. That is this URL right here if you're still on that configuration page. If not, just go back to GitHub, open up your demo pipeline project, and copy that so that you have that link. And then over in Visual Studio, there's a couple of different ways that you can do this, but the easiest is to come down here to the bottom where it says Add to Source Control. And when you click Git, this Create a Git repository window will open. Now, we don't want to create a repository. Of course, you can. If you didn't want to go to GitHub and you wanted to just do this kind of all in Visual Studio, you can do this here. But if you go to Existing Remote, you can actually just paste that existing remote link right there, and that is how we are going to get connected. So we will create and push, and your output window will open. If it doesn't automatically show you the Git stuff, you can change it to make sure, and we can see created a local commit, opened our repository, and if we come over here and refresh, we should now see our project files have been added to the repo. So we are now connected, we're linked. And so you have a couple of controls down here at the bottom. We can see what branch we're on, we can see what repo we're on, and if we go to the Git changes window, this is where we can check in our items. So getting our application connected is an important step for us to then move on to the next item, which is adding our GitHub Actions workflow and getting that set up inside of our project. Now, I'm going to be putting together some things here in the Solution Explorer using the GUI, which is another reason why I'm going to put this together using another language. So you can also see the command line method of doing this. But the first thing we're going to do is we need to set up our workflows folder and our workflow file. So I'm going to create the GitHub and workflows folders I need, along with the YAML file that we'll need to specify our GitHub actions and our workflow inside of this project. So for me on Windows, the easiest way to do this is to right-click the solution and open it in File Explorer so that I can now come in here and add those files. You can also do this directly in the Solution Explorer window if you wanted. If you are using Mac, you can open your Finder and go to your project folder and do this the same way. You will want to make sure, you can see I'm still on Windows 10. I know I've got a Windows 11 upgrade coming soon. Very painful to talk about. I already have it on my laptop, so painful. You will want to make sure you have hidden files enabled, as well as file extensions. If you're not sure how to do that, it's under the view menu. But these files, folders, they start with a dot, like our get attributes and get ignore that you can see there. It is .github that we will be creating in here, and then we will create a folder called workflows. So .github, and then the folder is named workflows. Inside of the workflows folder, we're going to create a new file. This is going to be, and I'm going to name it .NET YML. That is the file extension for our YAML files, and that is the file that I need to have exist. And you can, if you've created this in your Solution Explorer, you'll have these items over here. If not, you can just drag and drop it directly into Visual Studio and edit it that way. You can open it in Notepad or your favorite editor and do it that way. No judgment here on how you want to edit your YAML file. It is not a compiled file. It is simply a text file with our YAML statements in it. And so once you have that file created, and again, if I'm going kind of quick, make sure you pause, get caught up, back up, stay in step with me. But the next thing we're going to do is we're going to outline in our YAML file the steps that we want to take. So get yourself into a good place, because we're going to move on to setting up the actions that we want to take in our YAML file. So to get started, let me make this a little bigger. Let's give we'll have a name. Let's call this build and test .NET project. I don't know why it wants to. I have Copilot on, so I get a lot of things like this where it's trying to help me add syntax in. Really, this is pretty close to what I want. So if you hit tab, it's going to go ahead and drop this in. It's unhappy with it as is because it's not quite right. But we do want to create essentially two triggers. And the triggers are what causes our pipeline to run. So we say like on push to a branch, we want the main branch, or on a pull request to the main branch. Now, the problem that Copilot and other tools have is right now you can see it's using tabs, and YAML hates tabs. So when you hit tab and let GitHub Copilot or other AI tools dump YAML code in, a lot of times the formatting will not be correct, and this creates a lot of confusion, especially in new development. I also prefer the bracketed syntax that I've just switched to here. I'm pasting from another file that I have previously worked with. I think this looks a lot cleaner, and now you can see the errors are all cleaned up because it's not using tabs, it's using spaces, which is required. So once you have your name and then you have your triggers, what is going to make this workflow run, we set up our jobs section. The jobs section has each item, all of the steps that we want to do every time our pipeline runs. All right, so instead of typing this all out, I've pasted this. So I'm going to give you a moment, right? Pause if you need to type it all out, but we're going to say our job is to build, and we're going to run, like, what are we running on? Ubuntu latest is fine. .NET Core runs on all kinds of stuff. Then what are the steps? What do we want to do? We want to check out the code. So we give it a name, and then we give it an action. And so we can go look at, and this is a very large documentation window that tries to open. You can go look at the GitHub Actions documentation for, like, what are the actions that I can take, especially on certain stacks, like on .NET. What is it? I want to set up .NET and make sure that that's ready to go. I have to specify a version. .NET 7 is this is actually probably a .NET 8 application, but 7 is fine for this little hello world we're putting together. And then we want to restore dependencies, run a .NET restore. So if I have any NuGet packages or anything that I'm using, it will make sure and restore those. And then it will do a build, and then it will run any tests. Now, I don't have any tests set up, but it's just, and I don't have a test project in here, but you could then specify what tests you wanted it to run. So once you have all of this in here, you can see there's no red marks. Make sure you've got that saved so that it is part of your application. And we need to make sure and commit and push these items. So in either under our Get window, where you can push, you can also go over to your Get changes and get this window again. We can see the changes that we're tracking. We can see this folder was added. We can see this file is added. So we can make a commit message to add GitHub Actions workflow. And then we can commit all, and we can push. And that is what gets our file up to GitHub. And I'll tell you, this is what I get for copying and pasting, because I originally named this main, because that's the name of the primary branch of the project I was copying from. But GitHub created this one with master, and instead of changing it, I just went in here and changed this to master. So double check on yours that the same thing didn't happen. If your main branch is actually called main, great, leave it. If not, change it to master before you get this checked in, or otherwise it's not going to work. And I'm glad I caught that just right now. So coming back over to our GitHub window, if we refresh, we can see our changes. We can see that workflow was added. And then to make sure we've double checked that GitHub has seen our action, there is the Actions tab up here at the top. It says it hasn't run our workflow yet, but we can see over here that build and test.NET project is added, and that it's looking at .NET YAML file. And then once it runs, this is where that update will take place. So how do we test? Well, we said our trigger was anytime we anytime we push code or open a pull request. So if we come back over to Visual Studio and we come back over to our project, we can make a change. Save that change. See that in our GitHub changes window over here. Make a commit message. Commit all. Push. So it's successfully pushed. And now we can come back over to GitHub and our actions. We can see our build and test.NET project workflow ran. It did not pass. And if we investigate, we can see, hey, I was wrong. I need to be targeting .NET 8.0. I have my YAML file set up incorrectly. So let's correct. Come back over to our YAML, adjust the .NET version, save, go ahead and update YAML file. Let's go ahead and commit that. Now, GitHub Actions, because our triggers are for any pushes, is actually going to try to run, if we go back, it's actually going to try to run for our update YAML push right here, which isn't going to do anything because there's no code here to build. See, it's trying to build it and it's not going to build. So that's okay. We can ignore that. But let's see if we make another change. I'm just going to remove a space here and repush. Did that correct the problem? And sometimes this is what we need to do when we're setting up our YAML file to make sure it's working correctly with our application. Wait, that actually passed. There was nothing here to build. It's fine. But it's trying to run. Here we can see, and if we click into this, we can actually see in real time what is happening with our steps. So as you work on creating more sophisticated GitHub Actions and setting up more DevOps steps, you're able to see all of the items in here, and then we can see that this one passes. So really that's the point. As we work on our project and we walk through each of our DevOps steps with our GitHub Actions file, this runs automatically. So we would know, hey, this particular test failed, this particular item isn't working, and we will get into some of those in a later video. But hopefully you were able to follow along with this one. I know it's a little different than what we've been doing, that we're more of a lecture style. This is really more hands-on, requires you to really kind of get in there and set these pieces up. And I'll tell you, I do sometimes break things just so you can see what happens when you break things. I don't know, that's the teacher in me. I want you to see the problems. I don't always want the solution to work correctly every time, first try, because it's not. You as a student are not going to have that experience. So knowing how to fix your problems, knowing how to read the error messages and identify things is part of the learning process. So keep up the good work. I'll see you in a later video as we dig into this a little deeper. Thanks.